and welcome back to Root of Ramose, a poetry series in which we observe the mechanics, aesthetics, and meaning of the greatest founding texts of the Western poetic tradition. Today we're continuing our textual analysis of the Epic of Gilgamesh by looking at Tablet 5, where Gilgamesh and Enkidu finally fight Humbaba. In this video, I'll be covering the verse leading up to the battle, the fight itself, and then the actions taken after the fight. At the end of the video, I'll share one important lesson about crafting verse I think we can take away from what we've read so far in the Epic of Gilgamesh. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know below. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with this poetic analysis of Tablet 5. So, after a long journey, Enkidu and Gilgamesh have finally made it to just outside of Humbaba's domain. Our tablet begins. They stood there marveling at the forest, gazing at the forest's entrance. Where Humbaba came and went, there was a track. The path was straight and well trodden. They saw the mountain of cedar, seat of the gods and goddesses' throne. On the face of the mountain the cedar proffered its abundance. Its shade was sweet and full of delight. Thick tangled was the thorn, the forest a shrouding canopy, cedar, balaku trees. So finally, Enkidu and Gilgamesh have arrived at the cedar forest. We see them taking in the fullness of this almost mystic environment. At this point in the narrative, we know that the mountain is the dwelling place of the gods, of which Humbaba is set to guard. Between the lines, its shade was sweet and full of delight, and thick tangled was the thorn. We are provided with a dual representation of the nature of this place, that there is a delicate peace provided, but also an aspect of brutality and danger protecting it. When our heroes confront Humbaba, we see him represented with the aggression of a hostile, ruthless antagonist. There is an intense brutality to his words, as we will see in this passage, starting on line 85. Humbaba opened his mouth to speak, saying to Gilgamesh, "Let fools take counsel, Gilgamesh, with the rude and brutish. Why have you come here into my presence? Come, Enkidu, you spawn of a fish who knew no father, hatchling of terrapin and turtle, who suckled no mother's milk. In your youth I watched you, but near you I went not. Would yore have filled my belly? Now in treachery you bring before me Gilgamesh, and stand there, Enkidu, like a warlike stranger? I will slit the throat and gullet of Gilgamesh. I will feed his flesh to the locust bird, ravening eagle and vulture." What I find striking is that Humbaba already knows of both Gilgamesh and Enkidu and recognizes them instantly. With the stanza referring to Enkidu, there are a few things that we can discuss regarding the symbols that are used to describe him. First, Humbaba states, "You spawn of fish who knew no father." Now in Mesopotamia, the fish was associated with the god Enki, and the fish symbolized the life-giving power of water and connection between humans and the divine. To some extent, this could very much describe an aspect of Enkidu's creation, because he does exist in a kind of liminal space between humans and the divine. So he is that connection point. But I think here, it may be referencing that aspect of Enkidu's nature in part, but it's more so rather being used as an insult against Enkidu. And it's referencing the breeding of fish and highlighting his abstraction from the natural birth or lineage that humans have. So it's a way of demeaning Enkidu. Then regarding the turtle symbolism, there's quite a lot that we could take away from what it could be suggesting. In ancient Mesopotamian mythology, the turtle was associated with Enki, the god of water. It was thought that Enki used the turtle to travel through time and space. In Sumerian culture, one mythological story has Enki sending the turtle to battle his rival, Ninurta, the god of rain. The turtle was victorious, highlighting this reptile's resiliency and strength. So twice now we have a reference to Enki, the god of water and creation, despite the fact that we know that Aruru was the goddess that created Enkidu. We can see that Aruru is also known as the goddess Ninurta, meaning Lady of the Sacred Mountain. Some religious sects of Mesopotamia believed Ninurta to be the sister of Enki and the mother of Ninurta. Additionally, with the point that the turtle travels through space and time, that could explain the mystery around the strange, non-linear timeline of the narrative in Tablet 1 between the creation of Enkidu and the prophetic dreams of Gilgamesh about Enkidu even before his creation. So, given all this information, we can see there are several parallels between Enkidu's story as well as the myth of the turtle sent to battle against Ninurta that it appears to be referencing. Moving on, when Humbaba mentions in his threat both the throat and the gullet, that he would intentionally have his body picked apart and fed upon by scavengers shows his merciless brutality. Proper burial was incredibly important to individuals of that era, as stated by Joshua J. Mark in his article entitled Burial in Ancient Mesopotamia. The deceased were supposed to be buried respectfully, with grave goods and their final resting place tended by family members bringing food and drink offerings. Failure to observe the accepted burial traditions prevented the soul from finding their place in the afterlife, and as a restless spirit, they would return to haunt the living. Those who died in battle, on the sea, while traveling, alone on some errand, secretly murdered, alone in their homes, or in any other way that deprived them from the attention, assistance, and offerings of their families, did not fare well in the afterlife. It was up to the living to not only see the deceased off on their final journey, but to maintain them ever after. With that in mind, we can see that Humbaba not only seeks to kill, but to also forsake the soul of Gilgamesh. This is truly a dire battle, and the two of them have everything to lose. After the back and forth exchange, we have a fragment of about 20 lines missing, and then the action of the fight starts on line 132. He smote the ground and faced him head on. At the heels of their feet the earth burst asunder. They shattered as they whirled. Mount Sirion and Lebanon, black became the clouds of white, raining down on them death like a mist. Shamash roused against Humbaba the mighty gale winds, south wind, north wind, east wind, and west wind, blast, counterblast, typhoon, hurricane, and tempest, devil wind, frost wind, gale, and tornado. There rose 13 winds, and the face of Humbaba darkened. He could not charge forward, he could not kick backwards. The weapons of Gilgamesh then reached Humbaba. In a plea for his life, said Humbaba to Gilgamesh. The imagery in this passage is exceptional. The visuals are incredibly vivid and specific. I love the lines, black became the clouds of white, raining down on them death like a mist. It takes what is natural and familiar to us and inverts it into an uncanny and menacing description, something similar to that of a storm, of which we know is the doing of Humbaba. As was previously asked by Ninsun in prayer, Shamash abides by the supplications and sends the 13 mighty gale winds to assist in the battle. In this case, the winds are used as a means of binding Humbaba's mobility long enough for Gilgamesh to gain the upper hand in the fight. As we know from the last tablet, Shamash warns Enkidu and Gilgamesh they needed to hurry in order to defeat Humbaba. Knowing that they could only secure victory if they acted quickly, this passage does well to reflect the urgency and sense of swiftness to the battle itself. These stanzas show the lines breaking free from the usual couplet format, and the subject matter becomes more varied within a shorter amount of time. In a plea for his life, said Humbaba to Gilgamesh. "You are so young, Gilgamesh, your mother just bore you, but indeed you are the offspring of wild cow Nin's son. By Shamash's command the mountains you flattened, O offshoot sprung from Uruk's midst, Gilgamesh the king." So here we have Humbaba appealing to Gilgamesh's pride by praising his ability to carry out Shamash's commands at so young of an age, as well as acknowledging his position as the king of Uruk. There is then a back and forth between Humbaba begging for Gilgamesh to spare his life, and then offering to provide his service to Gilgamesh. However, Enkidu warns Gilgamesh not to listen to Humbaba's offer. There is then an acknowledgement by Humbaba that he was attempting to deceive when he states, "Also, you know all sorts of speech." In this scenario, he is referencing the art of persuasion. We may have assumed that his words were in earnest, but Humbaba's true spirit is shown when he speaks to Enkidu. "I should have picked you up and hanged you from the sapling on the way into the forest." And yet, immediately after saying he should have killed him, he proceeds to beg Enkidu to intercede for his release from Gilgamesh's grasp. Enkidu gives no attention to this request, but instead tells Gilgamesh, "My friend Humbaba, who guards the forest of cedar, finish him, slay him, do away with his power. Humbaba, who guards the forest of cedar, finish him, slay him, do away with his power, before Enlil, the foremost, hears what we do." This couplet refrain invokes an emphasis on what Enkidu is saying, as if he is attempting to grab the attention of Gilgamesh and compel him to action. "The great gods will take against us in anger Enlil of Nippur, Shamash of Larsa, establish forever a fame that endures, how Gilgamesh slew ferocious Humbaba." So these verses are incredibly important because it fills in a few important gaps that were created by the fragmentation of earlier tablets. So there may be two possible reasons why Enlil would be angered. The first may be that Humbaba is one of his creations that he set to guard the cedar forest. Considering that Enlil was accredited with separating Kai from An to create the world, it wouldn't be much of a stretch to believe that he may have also created Humbaba as a ferocious guard to keep mortals away from the heavens. Another possible explanation for Enlil being angered may just simply be that Enkidu is recognizing that what Gilgamesh is doing is going against divine order. Due to Enlil being known as one of the highest respected gods in the Sumerian pantheon of gods, his judgment would most likely find them guilty of breaking some sort of moral precedent. Regarding why Shamash may be angered, I think he's referring to them not being swift in their execution of Humbaba. And again, we are reminded to what end they have sought to carry out this journey, and it is to achieve a kind of lasting fame. Aside from the pure glory of the acclaim, another deeper reason for wanting to not be forgotten would be so they could obtain continual favor in the afterlife by the offerings of food and drink long after their passing. So now we will move on to the slaying of Humbaba. Gilgamesh heard the words of his friend. He drew forth the dirk at his side. Gilgamesh smote him in the neck, Enkidu, while he pulled out the lungs. Springing up from the head, they took the tusks as booty. Rain in plenty fell on the mountain. In plenty fell on the mountain. This is a gruesome depiction of an execution. They cut Humbaba's throat. It seems fitting that they would remove his lungs, as his howl was described as being endowed with a kind of metaphysical power. The removing of the tusks is done rather out of personal gain. The tusks may have been able to be used as a resource, maybe for trade, or it may have utility for some spiritual ritual. While it may be a very obvious observation, and certainly a cliché in modern terms, the rain here is used to reflect the tone of the scene as very somber. Just as Humbaba is falling from power, The black storm clouds are now falling from the sky. Said Gilgamesh to him, to Enkidu, "Now, my friend, we must impose our victory. The auras slip away in the thicket. The auras slip away, their radiance grows dim." Said Enkidu to him, to Gilgamesh, "My friend, catch a bird, and where go its chicks? Let us look for the auras later, as the chicks run here and there in the thicket." So as far as what the auras are, we know they endowed Humbaba with his power. A brief explanation of the auras is provided by Dr. Ira Spar from their article entitled Mesopotamian Deities. They explain the perceived nature of such deities by stating the following. Unlike humans, however, they were immortal, and like kings in holy temples, they possessed a splendor called malamu. Malamu is a radiance or aura, a glamour that the god embodied. It could be fearsome or awe-inspiring. Temples also had malamu. If a god descended into the netherworld, he lost his malamu. In the case of Humbaba, he is never said to be a god. However, it makes sense that the passage to the house of the gods would need a guard with godlike power, and this explains why the ogre Humbaba was given this strength. "Smite him again, slay his servant alongside him." Gilgamesh heard the word of his companion. He took up his axe in his hand. He drew forth the dirk from his belt. Gilgamesh smote him in the neck. His friend Enkidu gave encouragement. He fell. The ravines did run with his blood. He slew the ogre, the forest's guardian, at whose yell were sundered the peaks of Sirion and Lebanon. The mountains did quake, all the hillsides did tremble. So here we see it takes both the dagger and axe in order to finally make Humbaba fall. There is then a final yell from Humbaba, and it shakes the nearby mountains. The brutality of the scene is captured by the blood of Humbaba running into the water. He slew the ogre, the cedar's guardian, the broken. As soon as he had slain all 7 of the auras, the war-net of 2 talents weight, and the dirk of 8, a load of 10 talents he took up, he went down to trample the forest. He discovered the secret abode of the gods, Gilgamesh felling the trees, Enkidu choosing the timber. So, after the slaying of Humbaba, they slay the 7 auras. From the spoils, Gilgamesh picks up the war-net and the dagger weighing 8 talents, which is 4 times the weight of his dagger that had been smithed for this journey in Tablet 2. Aside from that, Enkidu begins talking to Gilgamesh. "By your strength alone you slew the guardian. What can bring you dishonor? Lay low the forest of cedar. Seek out for me a lofty cedar, whose crown is high as the heavens. I will make a door of a reed's length's breadth. Let it not have a pivot. Let it travel in the door jamb. Its side will be a cubit, a reed's length its breadth. Let no stranger draw near it. Let a god have love for it. To the house of Enlil the Euphrates shall bear it. Let no folk of Nippur rejoice over it. Let the god Enlil delight in it." They bound together a raft, they laid the cedar on it. Enkidu was helmsman, and Gilgamesh carried the head of Humbaba. So, for whatever reason, they want to build the door, and it must have some spiritual purpose, considering that a door is where Enkidu and Gilgamesh met, and a door was created each time they invoked a prophetic dream for Gilgamesh. In this case, I would imagine it symbolizes a passing through a certain plane of existence or a certain plane of being. However, the door is not intended for unknown persons, but rather is to please a god, specifically Enlil. This act is done as an offering to gain favor with Enlil in spite of the unwarranted killing of Humbaba. Finally, the 2 of them create a raft, and we are left with the dreary image of the 2 of them sailing off with the head of Humbaba being held by Gilgamesh. This seems to invoke a tone of heaviness, and leave us with an anticipation for the difficulties to come for Gilgamesh and Enkidu. So far, this text has demonstrated that the anticipation of action is far more valuable for the writer than the event itself. The setup of introducing Gilgamesh, the rituals and rites performed for blessings of safe travel, all the time in the forest being propelled by prophetic dreams, the anxieties of our protagonist shared at different points throughout the narrative, all of this is used to create depth, meaning, and connection as a foundation for the narrative. Knowing the tension between characters and gods and the ever-presence of moral conflict is what brings the weight and the severity to each moment and detail of the text, and most certainly to the few moments provided of intense action. The journey to slay Humbaba is set up from Tablet 2, and all of the verse leading to the fight is given in order to create this sense of an epic, in the true original sense of the word. Really, a lot of modern works don't understand how important it is to build depth in characters' motivations, and then the struggle of the journey to make the eventual climax hold any emotional weight or value for the audience. You see this so often in movies. You could have the most spectacular scenes of action and intrigue, but if there hasn't been any time set up to develop the character's will and desires, and no stakes have been placed on what must or must not happen, it falls flat. The action holds no meaning. One may assume this is a lesson that can only be applied to more action-driven narratives, but that couldn't be further from the truth. The idea of building up to a climax point is a concept that's inherent in all poetry, even the genres of verse that don't involve such obvious external action, like that found in the genre of epic poetry. In poetry, this climax point would be considered the turn or the volta. While this is a foundational rhetorical pivot solidified in the structure of sonnets, it is a literary tool and structure that can be found in nearly every worthwhile poem. Just like with epics, there has to be an emotional climax point, for verse, there has to be a dramatic position that the lines are leading to in order to build that state of mind for the audience where they can experience the full weight of what meaning is being presented at the highest point of your verse. Like you're helping the reader to stretch out their arm to reach and grab onto some feeling, experience, or thought they have never encountered before. That is what language can do when it is done well. That to me is the highest ideal of what art can accomplish, and the task of the artist to seek to create. Thank you everyone for watching. That concludes this installment of Root of Ramose. Until next time.